Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for the next session of our Get Certified Fabric Analytics Engineer series. My name is Anna. I'll be your producer for this session. I'm an event planner for Reactor, joining you from Redmond, Washington. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our moderators to answer. Our session is being recorded. It will be available to view on demand right here on the Reactor channel. With that, I would love to turn it over to our experts for today, Greg and Heidi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Anna. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. We're talking about Get Certified series. I'm super excited to be joining you on your journey for DP-600 this time. I know we've been talking about all things data over these series, so we've had some DP-700, we've had some 300, but today is all about the Fabric Analytics Engineer. But you probably want to know who's on your screen. So I'm Heidi Hastings. As you can tell from my accent, I'm from Australia. I'm one of the data platform MVPs. I'm also a certified trainer, and I work day to day in data analytics consulting. How about yourself, Greg?
Hey, folks. And Heidi, I'm Greg. And so I'm, again, a long-term data platform MVP and also part of the Microsoft Regional Director Program, which I normally describe as that just gets me on a whole lot of interesting mailing lists inside Microsoft. I've added social links and things down there at the bottom, so don't be a stranger. And welcoming today, we also have our wonderful moderators. So Marty's an old friend and data platform MVP and MCT, and we've got Philippa Burgess as a Microsoft student ambassador. But also, this is part about getting ready for DP-600, and this is not the only session in terms of this. So this is the Fabric fundamentals area, but in addition to this, there's a whole lot of sort of drill-in sessions where we look at specific aspects of it, but all of which are covered as part of the exam. And so you'll note here on February 11th, there's Exploring the Data Warehouse. There's another session on semantic models and Power BI. And there's also even a real-time intelligence, security, and admin one. But in addition to that, there's a series called Fabric Data Days. And tell us about that, Heidi.
Yeah, so I know you're probably thinking, hang on, what's this monthly? We understand that everyone's time is important and not everyone can make every session every week. So they've gone with a monthly cadence as well. So the next one coming up is going to be on February 24th. That is Pacific Time USA. So for those of you in the Southern Hemisphere, make sure you adjust to your time zone so that you don't miss out. But it's going to be all about coding languages. They're going to dazzle you with the differences, awesome advantages, and the super similarities so that you can get an understanding of all the languages you can use within Fabric. So these are monthly days. So it's the same as what we're doing here, but on a monthly schedule. So if you're just short on time, maybe pop into those monthly sessions. But don't worry, everything's recorded. So if you're watching back these recordings whilst you can't talk to us live, you can go ahead and ask questions with the community and with us in all those different sessions. Now, free instructor-led training. If you haven't already heard about the In a Day series, Microsoft offers up a number of topic areas and they put them in a day, which means you get a full day of content, of labs, being able to try out the features. Now, with Fabric specifically, we happen to have two. There's Fabric Analyst in a day and there's Fabric Real-Time Intelligence in a day. If you've never heard of them, go to that aka.ms link, see if there's one available in your region or virtually. They're run all around the globe and often run by partners as well as Microsoft. So do check those out. They're free to attend, and sometimes they come with certification opportunities as well to get those vouchers. We know everyone loves a voucher. Make sure you check out the banner. You'll see how you can get a voucher related to the certification exams that are currently available in this space.
And in fact, vouchers are, of course, something everybody wants to know about. So of course, it's great if you can get a voucher. It's awesome to get certified free. It's still good value even if you don't. But there's an opportunity to request a voucher today. We'll leave this up on the screen for 30 seconds or so, this is an option where you can go and request a voucher for 600 or 700. There's a limited number of these, and so that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you'll get one. So you need to get in early because supplies are limited. But if you are eligible, then basically it should be within about 2 weeks that you get it back. But we all know you love free certs, so there's the QR code, and hopefully you've had enough time to go off and grab that QR code and go off and start applying for that. But don't do that right now because you need to watch the rest of the session. Just make sure you've got the link.
Now, I know I've taken advantage of those vouchers that's come available. You know, if you want to save a few dollars, definitely get the vouchers. Now, FabCon, and it's not just FabCon, it's FabCon plus SQLCon. What is it? It's a full week or 3 days and an optional 2 days of workshops and pre-conference sessions where you can spend your week with a bunch of tech professionals from all over the world. So we've got stuff from the product teams. We've got stuff from the support teams within Microsoft. We have data professionals from all over the world. They can be MVPs, MCTs, data pros, student ambassadors, you name it, there is a session for you. But it is FabCon and SQLCon. So if you're someone who's working with Azure SQL and SQL Server, you can come to this event as well. It's an in-person conference. There are no virtual sessions. There's exclusive content. And these are great ways to not only connect with the data community, learn about the data products, but also potentially get opportunities to join some of those previews and influence the direction of the products going forward. It's a great place to bring your questions, network with people, ask those questions. All questions are welcome. It's a very welcoming community, and we want you to learn and get something out of the event. I know I've been lucky to attend the event last year in the USA and in Vienna in Europe, and this year I'm going to Atlanta as well. So if you do get the chance to come say hi, and make sure you also look for these codes. This one's $200 off. So that can save you a bit of money and allow you to go, maybe that can go towards attending one of the workshops or your travel to get there, or even your hotel accommodation. But definitely check out this event. It is a huge event. There's probably 4,000 to 6,000 plus people in one place at one time, all talking about data. Great opportunity to learn. I'm super excited, and I hope you are too. But all about today, let's get into that content, the good stuff. So we're going to do an intro to Fabric. We understand that not everyone has seen or played with Fabrics. We want to make sure you're all on a level footing as we go through these fundamentals. We're going to talk about Lakehouses. Now, these are Lakehouses within Fabric, because Lakehouse is also a generic term out in industry. We've also got how we're going to ingest data into that Lakehouse, where we call out Dataflow Gen 2, but we're also going to refer to notebooks and to pipelines. And with all that data movement going on, we need a way to orchestrate it. So we'll cover off the factory pipelines. Now, they're a little bit different to the Azure PaaS Data Factory. Similar name, slightly different product. And without missing something, we're also going to cover Spark, because Spark is available in Fabric. There's something for everyone. And we are live, absolutely live and interactive. You can see that chat happening. We've got people from all over the world. We've got a number of moderators, as Greg mentioned. So please do put your questions in the chat. We hope to get through as many as possible. And if we're unable to get through some, feel free to reach us on the socials, jump on the forums, and we'll try and get your questions covered. But it is live and interactive today, so feel free to ask your questions.
So the certification we're focused on today is DP-600. So keep in mind there are 2 Fabric certifications. So 600 deals more with the analyst and analytics side of things. And then you have the 700 exam, which deals with more the data engineering side. If someone took this really early on, then there was only 600, and it tended to have a broader focus. But now they've sort of broken it into 2 exams. So you might see people who've talked about the initial 600 as having a slightly more engineering focus, but that changed along the way. And so this is an intermediate level exam. It's not intended to be a sort of an introductory one. You still should do things like the fundamentals type courses before you get into this. But this is, as I said, still intermediate. It's not an expert level exam. But the things that it's focusing on are around the things you need to do to maintain a data analytics solution and to do preparing data, but it's, as I said, less heavy on that than 700 is, the exam. And a big part of it, though, is also about implementing and managing semantic models. Importantly as well, you need to be comfortable with a number of languages, and in particular, SQL or SQL is used extensively in various areas. KQL is used with the Custo databases, which are commonplace for a whole lot of, particularly in the past, you will have seen them more in Azure Monitor and tools like that if you've used any of those. But these are a type of database which is intended for really large numbers of rows. And it's a query language designed to, perhaps I've got a huge number of events that have occurred and I need to be able to cycle out and query those really quickly. In addition to that, you need to be comfortable with DAX. And so DAX is the language that's used in the back end of the semantic models. And so that's also a really important language to be using as part of this. In addition to what the ones shown on the screen there, I'd also throw that into the mix that there's probably an interest as well in the M language, just a little bit. You don't need to know it in depth because most people use it as part of Power Query, and they tend to do things graphically all the time. But there are often a number of things that we tend to do with the M language as well, but it's not sort of specifically examined in this exam. Now, what you really do need to focus on is the study guide. I see people all the time who are preparing for these exams, and then they find areas that they're really surprised that they haven't covered. In particular, I hear people say all the time, like, I work with this product all the time, but I've never seen that thing that I was asked about, and so on. The product is not about what you do in your job. Specifically, it's about the things that can be done, right? Whether you do them or not. And the most important tool here, there are practice tests and things like that, but the study guide is the most important one to me. Whenever I'm preparing for these exams, and I've done a lot of them, I've done nearly 100 of them now, the thing I look at is this study guide, and I go through every bullet point that's on there, and I make sure that I understand every single bullet point that's there. And importantly as well, there's a percentage shown. And so if you want to get an idea of the balance of the exam, notice that it says maintain a data analytics solution is 25 to 30%, preparing data is 45 to 50%, and semantic model work is 25 to 30%. So that'll give you a feeling for the mixture of questions that are going to come up as part of the exam. Now, what we need to start looking at then are the end-to-end analytics with Fabric. And so many people in the session will have seen details of Fabric in the past. Just want to quickly mention that this is now as it says, the unified data platform for transformation. Importantly, Fabric includes a whole lot of different tools, which often they sort of refer to as experiences. But if we look at the first of these is Data Factory. And so it provides a modern data integration experience that lets you ingest, prepare, and transform data from a whole lot of different sources. And so it has the simplicity of Power Query, but you can use more than 200 native connectors to go off and connect to data sources, both on premises and in the cloud. And the analytics section this is Fabric that provides really an overall all-in-one analytics solution. And it unifies the whole data lifecycle into a single cohesive workflow. So it starts with Data Factory, then we can feed into data warehouses and data engineering, where Spark and SQL engines process things. And we populating the data, we'll see into Delta Lake formats. There are, as well as the data warehouses that are considered part of the analytics, there are also databases in Fabric, which are developer-friendly transactional databases rather than data warehouse-style databases. And these are under the covers based on the same sort of thing as Azure SQL database. So this allows you to easily create your operational database in Fabric and lets you use the Fabric capacity rather than having separate licensing for the database. And in addition, by using mirroring capabilities, you can bring data from a whole lot of different systems into one lake. In fact, you can continuously replicate from Azure SQL database, from Cosmos DB, Databricks, Snowflake, and others. The number of those is increasing all the time. Fabric real-time intelligence analyzes data as it arrives. And so this is about building event-driven systems. And so this could be Internet of Things style or IoT sensor readings, application logs, click streams on websites and so on. And it lets you extract insights and visualizations on the data that's coming through. And you can also then configure it to take actions in the data that as it's flowing through. There's a real-time hub as part of this, and it provides a whole lot of no-code connectors that converge a whole lot of organizational data and sort of bring it in and let us get started with it inside those style of databases. IQ is a relatively new workload. It's still being rolled out. It's in preview at the moment. And this is about unifying business semantics across data, models, and systems. It introduces a new type of Fabric object called an ontology. And this is about organizing your core business concepts and rules into a sort of a unified semantic layer. It's really common for different areas of a business to use the same words but mean entirely different things. You might be surprised, but I've done work with things like retirement fund companies or superannuation companies. Different parts of the organization cannot agree on what the word member means, for example. These sort of terms, so it becomes really important to start to think about how do we define a language that works across the business? And the ontology is the thing that lets you do that. So it connects to OneLake data, and it can also connect to existing semantic models. It can sort of inherit the information because a lot of organizations will have multiple semantic models and they want to get an overall view of the whole thing. Power BI, of course, has been a super important thing for a long time. Lets us connect to data sources, create interactive charts and dashboards, and share insights across the organization. Now, over the top of this, we're of course getting AI assistance all the time now. So Copilot in Fabric gives you an AI-assisted help right across the platform. So it lets you ask natural language questions to generate code, to build pipelines, to explore and visualize data, and to get insights without needing to use deep technical commands. It's also useful for speeding up development tasks and troubleshooting and making analytics more accessible by translating plain English into actions inside Fabric. It integrates with the Fabric tools and lets you streamline workflows, but overall it's designed to increase your productivity. OneLake is the core. And so OneLake in Fabric is the unified, scalable data lake that serves as the central storage layer. And so it holds the data from right across the platform. All these different experiences store their data in OneLake with very, very few exceptions. So it lets you store, access, and manage both structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data in a single place. So we can have just files, but we can also have managed tables, and we'll see a little bit more about those later. But OneLake integrates seamlessly with Fabric's analytics and AI services. So look, any of the tools in Fabric can read and write the same data without needing to sort of move it around before you can do that. And finally on this slide, the governance defines how data is secured, classified, discovered, and used across the platform. So it's useful for ensuring consistency, right across control, lineage, compliance, and responsible data sharing, but still allows teams to work with a shared data foundation in OneLake. So before you can get started with Fabric, you need to enable it at the tenant level. That can be done by an administrator, and it can either be a Fabric, a Power Platform, or a Microsoft 365 administrator. All the Fabric items, like Lakehouses and notebooks and pipelines and so on, they're all stored in OneLake, and they're accessed via Fabric workspaces. The workspaces need to have some sort of Fabric capacity before they can execute Fabric-related functionality. So when you create a workspace, one of the most important things you do initially is assign to it a capacity that can be used to execute Fabric-based code. But tell us about Lakehouses, Heidi.
Yeah, so one of the storage methods we have a number of ways we can store data and then make it as a bit of a window in. So Lakehouse is one of those options. Warehouse is another one. And Event House KQL database is another one again. But we're going to focus purely on the Lakehouse. So the Lakehouse within Fabric is an item type. That Lakehouse allows us to store those semi-structured, structured, and unstructured data points. It is similar yet dissimilar to Warehouse, because Warehouse we can't add files, whereas a Lakehouse, we can directly add files to a Lakehouse. Because it is one of the storage layers, and because Fabric allows you to do interactivity using a number of different approaches, while it's all under the hood, stored in the OneLake ADLS Gen 2 storage, it is scalable, it's a distributed file system, it's flexible, and it gives us the ability to query it. Now we can use multiple languages to work with it. So it follows the data lake patterns, where we can store the data in Delta format in tables, but it also means we can query it with SQL, because we have the SQL analytic endpoint, so we can do that relational modeling on it, and we can query with SQL. We can work with Spark and notebooks and query it with that, and we can also introduce new data sets using that. And we can use just the straight Explorer. So it allows you to work with any different persona. We get a number of different options. We're adopting it to be schema on read, not schema on write. And if we look at it inside the interface, once you create a Lakehouse item, you automatically get the SQL Analytic endpoint as well. It appears as a separate item. From there, we can go and create different models against it. We can go ahead and load up the Explorer. We can switch in and look at the SQL query view and write queries and query the data inside that Lakehouse. So you can see here on the screen, we're purely looking at it in that Explorer format. But we could toggle from Explorer into SQL and write in queries. We can preview the data, but don't worry, at all times, security is at play. So if your user doesn't have access to a particular column or a particular row, then they won't see that data in these viewpoints either. If you want to build a semantic model, you can go ahead and build a semantic model on top of that. So we can also go in and build a new semantic model. If you're looking at any of the docs, you would have noticed that Microsoft had got rid of the default semantic model. So it used to be when you create a Lakehouse, you automatically get a semantic model attached to it. Now Microsoft's removed that default because they understand that businesses want to build out semantic models specific to their business domain. But now that we've got all that storage, how do we get the data in? There are multiple ways. Now, these are only 4. But I think last count, me and Marty, who's one of the moderators in the chat, counted about 13 ways to get data into Fabric. So it's kind of a choose your own adventure. You can ingest data using notebooks, which is more of a pro code experience. And we're going to talk about that later in today's session. We have the Dataflow Gen 2 experience, which is often referred to as the low code, no code, or a suitable platform for citizen developers. Anyone who's familiar with using the Get Data experience in Power BI will seamlessly transition over to using a Dataflow Gen 2 because you have that drag and drop Power Query experience. With pipelines, they are used to both copy data and they can execute others. So while they're not great at doing transformations, they are great at being your orchestration tool for data movement, whether it's bringing data in, whether it's executing others to bring data in, or it's just making sure all your refreshes are occurring on the sequence that you want. Now, the last one is not so much about ingesting, but more about accessing data. The shortcuts. Shortcuts are like virtualized table references and file references. So you can have data in Amazon AWS S3 buckets. You can have data in Google GCP, in Dataverse, sitting in AWS Gen 2, and even on-prem S3. And you can create a shortcut that allows you to interconnect to that data and have it accessed via the Lakehouse, but not copied in. So it's a great way to be able to access the data where it lives, keep all your security intact, but just view it inside the Lakehouse. So those are some of the ways that we can get the data into Fabric. Then once we've got the data into Fabric and we're working with that in our Lakehouse, we often want to either explore that data further, do some hypothesis theory work. We might want to transform it and do cleansing. Everyone, loves to cleanse their data. We know everyone thinks their data is beautiful and perfect, but sometimes we need to do some transformations to make sure, we tidy up those nulls. If we've got concatenated columns that we might want to split out, we do all those sorts of things and visualize the data. So to that end, we can use Spark notebooks and Spark job definitions. We can use the SQL Analytic endpoint and write straight T-SQL queries. We can even create views in our Lakehouse. With the Dataflow Gen 2, that allows more transformation capability than the pipeline does. And then we've, of course, got the pipeline. But our favorite, tried and tested, is that Power BI for visualization. But don't forget, you can also do visualizations within the notebook, because it does support not only doing Power BI reporting in it, but also using other things like Matplotlib. So we've got all those different ways that we can work with the data. And Greg, you're going to tell us specifically about Dataflow Gen 2.
I am. So this is one of the ways that we can ingest data. As Heidi said, there's a lot of different ways you can get data in. And it might seem strange that the thing is just called Gen 2, I suppose, to someone coming to it new. I'm never actually a great fan of sort of numbering these things. And so, but this is because originally there was a very different data flow experience that was part of these tools. And it had some fairly severe limitations. The Gen 2 one version of the data flow just really gets around a whole lot of that. And so look, nowadays there are two primary high-level features that Data Factory implements. We can use data flows and we can use pipelines. So Dataflow Gen 2 lets you have a low-code interface and hundreds of different connectors and AI-based transformations, and lets you transform the data so much easier with more flexibility than really any other tool. It's all based on Power Query. Power Query, I've been in the industry a very, very long time, and you tend to get a bit, I suppose some people would say jaded, but it takes a lot to impress me, when I see something new. Power Query, when it first appeared, was one of those moments where I looked and I thought, that's simply awesome. And it brings that same experience directly inside this tooling. So you can use a Power Query style interface to go in and transform your data. Now, there's two different ways you get to use this. One is the tool itself, the data flow, can be sort of run as a standalone thing. But in addition to that, you can reuse it by sort of placing the data flow as a type of activity onto a pipeline as well. So they can be run just as one of the steps in a sequence of things that you're doing inside a pipeline. Now, if you look at Dataflow's Gen 2, traditionally, data engineers spend significant time sort of extracting, transforming, and loading data into a consumable format that we can use downstream. So the goal of this is to provide an easy, reusable way to take ETL tasks or extract, transfer, transform, load tasks using the sort of Power Query online option. And Dataflows let you have self-service users get access to a subset of the data warehouse, for example, separately. But you can optimize performance with these, which enables extracting data once for reuse and then reduces the data refresh time for slower sources. Data flows simplify data source complexity by only exposing data flows to sort of larger analyst groups. They give you consistency and quality of data. It's much easier to start to get the data into the right shape because you can see as you're doing the transformations how the data is being transformed. Now, there's some limitations with this concept. Of course, these aren't data warehouses. This is about how we get data into a data warehouse or a data lake. It doesn't do row-level security at this point because this is about the ingesting of the data. And of course, you do need a Fabric capacity to be able to use this. Now, there's a couple of different areas in the interface for Dataflow Gen 2. It's very much a Power Query Online style interface. And if you've used Power BI in the past, then the Power Query ribbon, which is the top part, number 1 shown, and the Dataflow Designer, they'll look very, very familiar to you already. And it supports a wide variety of data sources and connectors, but also the transformations are endless. There's, filtering and sorting rows and pivoting and unpivoting and merging and appending queries and so on and so on. It's really very rich. Number 2 is showing the queries pane. When you go in to do the editing here, this shows you the different data sources, which they call queries. And so the queries end up being tables once they end up in your data store, but you can also duplicate or reference a query if you need multiple copies of the same data, like you're creating a star schema and splitting data into little separate tables and so on. You can also disable the load of a query in case you only need a single time import. The diagram view, which is shown as number 3, gives you a visual indication of how the data sources are connected. And the data preview pane down the bottom, number 4, that's the one I love the most because, of course, it's showing you what the data looks like at the point you're up to. And importantly, there's over on the right-hand side, there's a query settings pane, and that includes what's called applied steps. And so the beautiful thing here is as you make changes then and add transformations, it just keeps adding to that list of applied steps. And one of the beauties of this interface is you can click back up on a previous step, and then it'll show you the data as to what it looked like at that previous step, and so on. This is all very, very powerful. And finally, one of the things that you wouldn't normally have seen in a Power Query style interface is down the bottom right, there's an area there where you can configure a data destination. So like a lakehouse, a warehouse, a SQL database, and so on. But these aren't the only destinations. You can load your data into a whole lot of different places when working with this here. Now, there's a number of common activities you can do within pipelines, and so you can stick data flow inside that. So this provides an excellent option for data transformations in Fabric, but the combination of data flows and pipelines is useful because often you need to do additional things apart from just that ingestion and transformation. So pipelines give you a visual way to complete activities in a specific order. You can do things in parallel. You can do them one after the other. You can do things like, I want to execute this and I don't care if it worked or not. This is the next thing I want to do after that, and so on. So we can build a complete orchestration for that. And so there are activities, common ones, things like copying data around, which again can be run as a separate standalone type of item in Fabric. We can have a data flow in there. We can add a notebook. If we're looking to do some complex restructuring of code using Python or another language, we can do that inside a notebook. Get metadata is an interesting activity. That allows you to do things like, can I go and see if a file exists? And if it does exist, let me get some details about that. Or I can just run a script, or I can run a stored procedure. These are all sort of standard activities inside this. But in terms of the orchestration, tell us about that, Heidi.
Yeah, so we touched on that. While we've got all these ways to get data into the platform and move data around the platform, we want to make sure that that data movement is orchestrated. We don't want to be loading the dimension tables and the fact tables out of order, or we don't want to load from one system if we have a dependency on another one without making sure we have that data first. So with the pipelines, now not to be confused with deployment pipelines, sometimes you'll hear people refer to these pipelines as data factory pipelines, as data pipelines, or just straight pipelines. But be mindful that inside the Fabric platform, we also have deployment pipelines, which is what allows us to move these item artifact solutions from one workspace to another in an automated approach. Think about that DevOps world. Within the construct of a pipeline, we can define activities. Those activities are tasks. They're things that can be executed. Now, you do have the option to disable an activity or a task. So if for whatever reason you've got an issue with a pipeline, you can disable it and have that published. We can also edit sort of offline, not in a live mode. We can edit the pipeline, make sure we're happy with it, we can validate it, and before we publish it out. As well as having those activities, we can also have specific activities that follow a bit of a pattern. So the main common one that gets used is the copy data tool. The pipeline is fantastic for copying data from A to B, whether that's an on-prem data source, another cloud data source, another vendor cloud data source, or even an API, and bringing that data into the Fabric platform. And the beauty of using the pipeline to do that is it's going to transfer that data set into that Delta format for you. But then if you're putting it into the Lakehouse, you'll automatically see it rendered as a table. So here you can see that we can do that copy activity. We go through a wizard, we pick the data source, we pick the destination, sometimes referred to as a sink or a destination. So those are one of the same. And then we can configure exactly where we want it. But you're probably going, that seems a bit hard-coded. It does feel a little hard-coded, but you've got to remember that all these activities can be parameterized. So we can do things like metadata-driven data loading solutions. We can use one pipeline to execute in a repeated fashion, like a for each loop, to load a different set of tables or a different set of files. And these wizards are a great way to get started. But we also know that there's common activities and common patterns that people do, which leads us to templates. Now, with templating, it's like saying, we're not sure how to build a pipeline, but I've got a concept that I need to achieve. I've got an outcome. I need a bulk copy from this database in, or I've got a series of files sitting in ADLS Gen 2, and I need to load them in as tables. Or I've got a customer that's given me all their data sets sitting in a SharePoint repository, and I need to be able to bring them into the Lakehouse and the Fabric platform to be able to do some analytics. This is where you use the templates. And those get updated all the time. So there's a template for just about everything. And if there isn't one, you can simply put the different activities together to get the outcome that you need. The other thing we do with a pipeline, we can run the pipeline. We can not only run it, but we can validate it. So validation allows us to do that design time check to say, hey, have I configured all the components in the correct way? If, for example, you didn't populate the destination on one of those activities, when you do the validate step, it's going to run those checks. It's not going to be future-proof. It's not going to be the be-all and end-all of the checks because there's only so much it can do at design time. Then we can run it. We can ad hoc run it, or as Greg pointed out earlier, we can schedule. And the beauty of a pipeline is there's a number of different ways to schedule it. We can schedule it in terms of time and say run it every hour on the hour, or I can say 8 p.m. every day, I want this to run, and you can specify the time zone. But you can also schedule it to run because of a different event. So if a file appeared in a particular location, schedule it to run. That partners pipelines with another item in Activator. The other thing we can do is we can view the results of a run. So as the pipeline is running, we can see, is it queuing a particular activity? How many source records has it got? How much data is being moved? Is it doing the processing through to the destination, or is it still reading the source file? And we can see all that rich data in the run history. You can even see the history over time. So if you think, hey, the pipeline's failing every so often, you can go ahead and look at the overtime history of that pipeline execution and be able to debug it that way. But as powerful as pipelines are, they're probably not quite as powerful as what you can do with a notebook using Apache Spark. Take us through that, Greg.
Yeah, so in this section, we'll have a look at Spark with notebooks. This is one of the things you do need to know your way around for this exam. And so look, first up, Apache Spark, it's basically an open source framework that's used for large-scale data processing and analytics. So it's integrated into Fabric directly. So it gives you a sort of a big data platform you can use for analytics. And Fabric Spark clusters are the powerful in-memory distributed framework that lets you do data processing at scale. So in Fabric, Spark can be used together with other analytics services like Lakehouses, notebooks, and data pipelines. And so Apache Spark is this distributed data processing framework that lets you do large-scale data analytics, but it's by coordinating work across multiple processing nodes in a cluster. So in Fabric, these are called Spark pools. The clusters are called pools. And Spark spreads the processing of large volumes of data across multiple computers. And so that's all done for you automatically. It can also run code written in a wide range of languages. So it doesn't matter if you want to write in Java or Scala, which is a Java-based scripting language, or Spark R or Spark SQL, Sparkle sometimes called, or PySpark, which is a Spark-specific variant of Python, and so on. But what you'll find in most situations that I see in Fabric, most people end up using PySpark and Spark SQL. They're the two that I'd suggest you should focus on. A Spark pool then has different types of compute nodes. So importantly, a head node in a Spark pool coordinates the distributed processes through a driver program, and then multiple worker nodes on which the executor processes run to do the actual data processing tasks. So it uses this distributed compute architecture to access and process data, but all in that compatible data store, like the data lakehouse that's part of one lake. Now, Microsoft Fabric importantly provides a starter pool for Spark in each workspace. So that means that Spark jobs can be started and run quickly with minimal setup and configuration. Originally, those starter pools weren't there, and people got the idea that starting up Spark took a long time. Now it's almost like magic how quickly it starts up by comparison with when this was first created. Now, to edit and run Spark code in Fabric, you can use notebooks or you can define a Spark job. So the first of these, if you want to use Spark to explore and analyze data interactively, you use a notebook. So notebooks let you combine text, images, and code written in multiple languages to give you an interactive thing that you can share with others and collaborate. Importantly as well, they have one or more cells. Now, each of the cells can have markdown formatted content or executable code. And so that's on a cell-by-cell basis. I love the fact that you can embed Markdown directly inside the notebook. So you can leave details of comments in real good detail as to what to expect in the next step in the notebook, for example. You could give examples of what you expect to see come out of it. Now, as powerful as notebooks are, the other thing you can do is that you can put Spark into what's considered a Spark job. So if you want to use Spark to ingest and transform as part of an automated process, you can define a job to run a script on demand or based on a schedule. And so you need to create a Spark job definition in your workspace, and then you specify basically that should be run. But look, a couple of things with Spark. There's a few concepts that are really, really important. The first example here, I've just said spark.read.format.csv, option header true, and then load a specific file. So imagine we need to load a specific CSV, but notice here I haven't given a list of the column headers, and I don't have a list of the data types and so on. So one way you can do it is you can give that over to Spark and say, you please just go and infer the schema for me of how that file is laid out. Alternately, you can go and create a schema as a structured type in Spark. I've defined all the different fields, saying sales order number is a string, sales order line number is an integer, and so on. I can define that. And then when I go to read the file, I can say .schema and then give the name of the schema and say, I'm expecting it to come in this shape. There are then lots of transformations you can do once the data ends up in a data frame, which is what the previous loading would produce. And so, for example, filtering or sorting, in this case, I've just said, look, no matter what the columns were that came in, I just want to select the customer name and the email address. But we can also do things like chaining methods together. So notice I've got .select and then I've got .where and so on. You can have a whole series of the different operations or methods sort of chained together in a single string. I wouldn't go crazy with this, but I mean, it's often incredibly convenient to do it this way. You can also do grouping and aggregation. So note the group by, where I've said, look, I've got a data frame, it's got some product sales. I've selected the item and the quantity columns out of that. I've then said group by the item, and then I want to sum. So this would allow us to go and sum the quantity of sales by item. And of course, once you've done the transformation, the other thing you might want to do, of course, is save the data frame that you then just created. And so importantly, the write method, you can say mode, and mode can be things like overwrite. So say right over the top of it, if it already exists. But importantly, all the ones we'll tend to work with, we generally are preferring these to be Parquet style files. And as part of the write, you can say this is a Parquet file, and here's the file name or location that I want that to go to. And another important concept is partitioning. This is an optimization technique that lets Spark maximize performance across its different worker nodes. So rather than having one node doing all the work, you can actually split the work out basically by filtering based upon particular columns. And so also when you're reading partition data back into a data frame, you can load data from any folder within a hierarchy that's created basically by specifying explicit values, or you can have wildcards for particular partitioned fields. Now, in terms of working with the data to query it, you've got a couple of different options for what you can do with this. So the first example here is just showing that I can create a view. So create or replace temporary view. That would give me a view which is temporary, meaning it's automatically deleted at the end of my current session. But I can also use this to create tables, and delta-based Parquet tables are the typical thing that we work with in OneLake. Now, importantly, Parquet is a way of storing data in a highly compressed format. What delta adds to that is it adds the transactional ability and also recording the changes that have occurred over time. So that's the thing that the delta part adds. So you'll often hear them talk about delta Parquet, but that's the two parts of that. Now, you can also create an external table, and this is the thing similar to what Heidi was talking about earlier with shortcuts and so on. You can say, look, there's this external data over here. I can create that as effectively like a link. Now, in terms of querying this, there's two basic ways that people do queries. So one is to use Spark SQL. And so this is example here said Spark SQL, and then note I've written a select statement inside there. And that's just like a normal SQL statement at that point, but it's embedded inside a Spark command. Now, the other way to do this is that in each of the cells of a notebook, you can specify what's called a magic, and that says this is what the coding is in the next part of this cell. And so here we've said %% SQL, and then we can actually just write a SQL query directly inside there as well. Finally, once you get the data in the right shape, there's two ways you can get to visualize this. So one is the built-in notebook charts. So you'll find one of the powerful things in a notebook is that when you get the data produced, you can then ask to render it using a whole lot of different visualizations. So this is not going and running the query again. It's saying, I've already got the data and I want to then visualize it differently. But another option, of course, is I could use a graphics package inside my code. And so the example here, it says uses matplotlib, but that's an example of a library that we can use inside the code. And of course, we could use that to render the data. But so Heidi, tell us about prepping for the exam.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on a few different ways you can do preparation for the exam, but I think one of the key ones is knowing what's available to help you prepare. Everyone prepares differently. Some people prefer hands-on, some people prefer, doing reading, some people prefer watching videos. One of the kickers though, one of those driving things is creating that sense of urgency. So one of the first things you can do is actually schedule the exam, especially if you've got the voucher organized from watching one of today's sessions or one of the sessions in the series and then going through that form process. Once you've scheduled the exam, it's important to get some hands-on practice. If you're limited with access to an environment, Fabric does have the ability to spin up a trial, so you can have a trial capacity. The other thing to look at is the applied skills. With an applied skills challenge, it's a testable lab environment. So those spin up a lab environment where you can go through a series of steps, and one of them happens to be working with a lakehouse. Review those prep materials. Now, Microsoft publishes Learn module content, applied skills stuff. They also provide ways for you to interact with the community. So if you've never seen it, the Fabric Careers Hub gives you options for joining study groups, for looking at where your user groups are around the globe and signing up for those, jumping on the forums to be able to listen and work with other people in the industry. So go through and use those preparation materials. Once you feel that you're at a point, give yourself a go at the practice assessments. Now, if you're ever looking at exams, not all of them have the practice assessment right from the start. Brand new exams don't have it. But DP-600 has been around long enough that we have practice tests available. And those are simulated questions. They're not going to be the exact questions from the exam. It's more to give you a bit of an idea of the types of questions you're going to get asked and the way they're going to ask them. Because it's important to read those questions in detail. And don't forget, this exam has case studies. Case studies provide you a scenario that's happening within an organization and then questions targeted to that scenario. They can take time to digest, so make sure you give yourself a bit of a practice about that. Look at these on-demand sessions, but look at what the community is providing. And we've got other sessions coming up. So not only is this the Live Learn series, there's other things. So have a look at what's going on around, coming up. We've got talking about exploring the data warehouse. So that's your Fabric warehouse. That's great to be able to understand the differences between Lakehouse and warehouse. Then we've got one on semantic models. As we talked about, semantic modeling is a key thing for a Fabric analytics engineer to be able to do, work with, troubleshoot, and monitor. So go through that one. Then you've got that monthly session about the coding languages. That's more in depth in the notebook space. And don't forget real-time intelligence, like a lot of people do, but it is still part of the exam. We've also got those monthly ones. Reminder, scan that QR code, go to the aka.ms/FDD/monthly. And I'm sure the team will drop these links in the chat to give you a hand. That's not the only thing though. In a day content run all around the world, virtual and in person. Check out the Microsoft events registration. Not only do they do things like the Analyst in a day, real-time in a day, but they also have just general Fabric sessions for you to get an overview of Fabric. And those are another great way to learn about the platform and learn about the opportunities to try out the features, especially if you're in an environment where your organization isn't yet adopting Fabric, but you want to be able to learn and take these exams and get certified in it.
And of course, the vouchers, which again, we mentioned at the beginning. Put the link back up again for a few seconds. So you've got a chance to grab that. But this, as I said, we can't guarantee that you'll get one. But if you apply, you should get that within 2 weeks. So not everybody will be eligible. But I might add, the chat for the session isn't the place to ask for it. So you need to go to the link and make sure that that's the one you've used. And if ever there was somewhere I wish I could be in the upcoming months, it's at FabCon. So I'm jealous of you there, Heidi.
I know. For those of you who are able to travel and able to travel over to the USA, come join us at FabCon, SQLCon in Atlanta, Georgia. It's going to be amazing. But if you can't make this one, don't forget there's also FabCon in Europe. So the FabCon in Europe, I think, is coming up Spain, Barcelona later in the year. And if you're someone who's working with the Power Platform, you might want to also look at the Power Platform Community Conference as well, which allows you to do more on the Power Platform space. But knowing that Power Platform and Fabric interact, there's also tracks for Fabric and Power BI in there specifically. Don't forget those registration codes. Speak to your employer. There's also links on the Fabric website there, that Fabric Community Conference, about if you need some help in justifying going to FabCon, or if your company is considering being a sponsor. There are a number of vendors that are there. Think about 4,000 to 6,000 attendees or even more. Those are what we've seen at the other ones. So those are places where you as an exhibitor can interact with the community. And I know we've dropped some more links in the chat about things where you can learn, like the Custo Detective Agency as well. So make sure you check out those resources and get yourself learning all the different ways you can work with the Fabric platform.
So that brings us to the end of our session. So thank you so much. We know that there's many other things you could have been doing right at this moment, and we thank you very much for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all for joining, and thanks again to our speakers. This session is part of a series. To register for future shows and watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen or in the chat. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find that link on the screen or in the chat. And we'll see you at the next one.